Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, live today on Monday, August 19th, a week removed from the second week of the NFL preseason, all the games concluding yesterday, and that's one of the first things we're going to talk about here today, a very heavy quarterback-centered episode on today's show. We're going to talk about the rookie performances, a bunch of them playing in their second preseason game this week, then also later on, more on one of those rookie quarterbacks, Michael Penix, and the decision by the Falcons to not let him play anymore in the preseason, plus Gardner Minshew winning the starting job for the Las Vegas Raiders are all coming up on today's show, plus a couple more down the line. But before we get started on those topics, I'd like to remind you guys, if you guys have any questions, comments, or any opinions you'd like to share, we definitely want to hear them here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. It's a big reason why it makes this show so enjoyable, to hear your guys' thoughts on anything I say or on any of the topics I have for you guys. And now, if you want to absolutely make sure that I see those questions and they feature on the show, make sure to use the quick and easy super chat feature down there at the bottom of the screen. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But also, if you do prefer an alternative, you could still use the GSMCpodcast.net tip and donations link if you do prefer to use that way to still support our show. We couldn't do this without your amazing support, and we're so thankful to have you guys as part of our community. But with that now out of the way, we could start on the first topic on hand, talking some more about these rookie quarterbacks over the weekend. Still showing some, I think, some more struggles this week for some of them, but still overall, very solid performances by three guys that I wanted to bring up on this first segment. With that being the case, I wanted to bring up the first one on here, Caleb Williams, playing in his second game, this time against the Cincinnati Bengals, was out there for roughly about the same amount of time, and I don't think just on the eye test alone, it looked as clean as maybe last week. This week he had a couple more struggles, a couple more tight throws to make over the middle of the field, and then some tighter, more, what's the word I'm looking for, just some more eccentric throws there against the Cincinnati Bengals. And, he finished still all right with a decent stat line, 6 for 13 for 75 yards and a rushing touchdown this time. And, those off-platform throws that were still there were still super impressive. I think he attempted them more this week just because the coverage was a little bit better, maybe playing a little bit better of a defense against the Cincinnati Bengals than potentially the Buffalo Bills, depending on who was starting. But, just those off-platform throws were still there, and that's a good sign always to see. The one that stands out was the one down the left sideline to Rome Odunze, going left and throwing across his body right on the dot to Rome Odunze, which was great. Not only to see the throw and how just ridiculously easy Caleb Williams made it seem, but the fact that it was right on the outside shoulder. Rome Odunze, also that connection with Caleb, is also a great thing to see. So everything kind of culminated into that one play. There was another one, again to Rome Odunze in the back of the end zone, but unfortunately he was just out of bounds. Another great throw by Caleb, rolling to his right and throwing it into the corner of the end zone. That would have been his touchdown, but then later on in the playing time that he had, he again found himself in the red zone. The play sort of broke down. He had good pocket awareness, which was what I took away from that play. Escaped pressure again, rolled all the way back to the left-hand side of the field and just ran it in. And those situations are always interesting to me just because a lot of times you see guys, one, try to buy too much time and it puts them in trouble, but Caleb, very aware of what that pocket was like at that point in time. Very good awareness. He rolls out and then rolls all the way back to the left, which more often than not usually ends up in someone trying to force something or a bad throw or something like that. I like how Caleb kept his composure and just ran it in rather than fitting it into a tight window into the back of the end zone or something like that. And just overall, his overall performance, there were some throws that got away from him. He tried to fit it into tight windows. He was successful with some. unsuccessful with others. But again, nothing too crucial to write home about. I think it's still maintained its steady level of performance for Caleb with all the expectations on his shoulders. I don't think anybody could say that they were disappointed. It's just almost more of the same, with I think a little bit better of a challenge with the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bears ended up winning this game as well, which was great. Then the second quarterback I wanted to mention on here was Jayden Daniels. Got to see a little bit more of him this time around. Played about an entire quarter, and he finished with a very efficient stat line, 10 of 12 for 78 yards. And while he might not have scored a touchdown or anything like that, there was no real wow throws in terms of, on the run, a deep ball down the left sideline or something like that, or just fitting it into a tight window. What I really was left impressed about with Jayden Daniels was that I think in the first game you saw the rhythm and the control of everything maybe was lacking a little bit, but this time it seemed like he was controlling everything. He seemed like he was very confident, very calm in there, maintained a good rhythm with all the plays that happened. It looked like every throw was on time and that all the offense was on the same page. And while that's a two-sided street there, obviously, with the receiver and the quarterback being on the same page, a lot of it has to do with the quarterback calling the right play, making sure everybody knows the timing of it all, and making sure the throw is right on the money when it's supposed to be there. And I thought Jayden did a good job of doing that this time around. The ball placement, the accuracy, and everything like that, every throw, at least I saw him make in that game, was, as soon as either the wide receiver turned around, which goes back to that timing aspect, or it was on the outside shoulder, away from the defensive back, more towards the sideline. And those are the little nuances that sometimes you don't get with rookie quarterbacks. A lot of the time when they're just trying to get the throw out, or they know the read is supposed to be there, they know the throw's just supposed to get there, they don't really pay attention too much to the ball placement, putting it on the right side of the body of the receiver. And Jayden showing that already gives me more confidence that, just like Caleb, this guy, it was announced today that he was going to be the starter. This guy in Jayden Daniels has just as much of an opportunity to wow everybody in his first year with the Commanders. And even though you look at the rosters and they might not be, player for player equal, Jayden Daniels still, compared to Caleb, I think could bring you a lot of the same things with the Washington Commanders this year. And, overall, it was a pretty efficient day. Nothing too exciting to write home about, but even that, still in and of itself, the efficiency can give you more of the same just from last week, building on it and gaining more confidence now as the official starter of the Commanders. I think they're feeling pretty good about themselves, naming this guy the starter after a stat line like this, now knowing that he's going to be the guy in Washington. Everything's going to be centered around him now, planning it around him, making sure that he is ready to go for their Week 1 matchup. And I think this week is a little hint of what we could see later on with Jayden Daniels. And then the last quarterback I wanted to mention is Bo Nix. He played on Sunday, or just last night, against the Green Bay Packers. And again, another strong showing from Bo Nix. Another efficient performance, too, from a rookie quarterback. 8 for 9 for 80 yards and 1 touchdown. Compared to last week, a little similar to Jayden Daniels. He looked more at ease, a little bit more under control, because last week I felt like he was running a lot, escaping the pockets a couple times, making some throws across his body, different arm angles and things like that, which is all right. He's capable of doing it, Bo Nix, but this time it looked like, again, more, he knew the timing of everything. He knew where everyone was supposed to be, how the coverage was supposed to develop, and where his guys were going to be attacking those zones. So I was left pretty impressed with that with Bo Nix, and more, it's starting to become evident to me why Sean Payton was such a big fan of him. While I still had my criticism and my doubts about him and being the starter for this Broncos team just because of the rest of his supporting cast, this guy alone, just looking at Bo Nix alone and these last two games, has really changed my mind a little bit about Bo Nix. I'm not afraid of saying that. I was feeling that he wouldn't be as efficient as he is right now, but clearly, coming in as a more experienced rookie into this NFL level, it's still a big transition, but I think having those extra years at Auburn and then also Oregon has paid off for him. Sean Payton clearly likes him. The ability to not take sacks, take the smart play, make the right read and everything like that is becoming very evident. He made a couple of nice throws over the middle. He showed his ability to run once again as well. He threw another touchdown throw. He threw one, but he was across the line of scrimmage. And then later on in the game, he threw one to Tim Patrick, which was great to see for Tim Patrick as well, not playing football in a long time. So overall, these three guys almost showed the same thing, but in different ways. I feel like they are similar in a way just because they all could very well start for each of their teams, but they each have a little bit something of their game that makes them unique, and I'm excited to see them after back-to-back performances like these for all three of these guys. I think all of them have made a very good case for themselves to start week one. We know Caleb and Jayden announced today are going to start. I think a lot of people are starting to see that Bo Nix has a really good chance of beating Jarrett Stidham out for that job. So hopefully he starts. Hopefully, I always love seeing how this new beginning starts for these teams looking to find their franchise quarterback. But those are the guys that really stood out to me. I failed to mention one of them being Michael Penix, who was supposed to play this weekend, but he didn't. It's not like he got injured or anything like that. It was just a choice by the Atlanta Falcons to decide not only to sit him for this second preseason game, but to also rule him out for the rest of the preseason. And that's going to be the second segment coming up after this break. The Atlanta Falcons announced this decision to not play Michael Penix. We're going to talk about what Raheem Morris had to say about it, my thoughts on it, and why I'm not a big fan of it. So stick around and find out why I feel that way after this short break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on and talk about some more of these rookie quarterbacks. I just finished talking about the three that I was left most impressed with after the second week of preseason, and that was my mindset heading into this week, thinking about Michael Penix. I was really looking forward to watching Caleb, Jayden, Bo, and Michael Penix on top of that. We also saw Drake May, but he played on Thursday, and we already talked about him. So I was really looking forward to watching those three and Michael Penix because they all played very well in their week one matchups. With Michael Penix in his debut against the Miami Dolphins, finished 9 for 17, 104 yards in a quarter and a half of playing time. So he already got a good amount of playing time, more than any of the other guys I finished talking about did. And, he did very well. I think most of the reviews were very positive. Raheem Morris had to say very good things about him after that game. So knowing that he played well, you were left pleasantly surprised about it, and really knowing that he's not going to be the starter, right? I think that's the consensus around everybody, is that Kirk Cousins is going to be the starter, right? Why wouldn't he play this week? That was my understanding of the entire thing. I thought he was going to play on Saturday against the Baltimore Ravens, but instead it was Taylor Heinicke out there, and, Michael Penix never got into the game, and after that, obviously, people were left wondering why, and Raheem Morris had this to say about his decision to not play Michael Penix anymore, not only in the second week that just concluded, obviously this past weekend, but overall not playing him anymore in the preseason. Raheem Morris said, we wanted to see him be able to answer questions, talk about it on the sideline, go out there and execute, make mistakes, and know what to do. We saw enough last week of Michael Penix in the live stuff, and now we had the chance to mitigate him in practice. We give him a bunch of live stuff in practice that you do everything that you would do in a game other than get hit. And after that, he made it official that Michael Penix will not play in the third preseason game afterwards. So he's done. We're probably not going to see more of him. We're not going to see more of him in the preseason. And now talking about the decision to do that, right? It's just odd to me. It's weird because, again, he's not going to be the starter. It's going to be Kirk Cousins. You paid him $100 million guaranteed, a massive contract to sign with your team over the offseason, and there's no reason why Kirk wouldn't play, right? He's healthy enough to practice and everything like that. Unless for some reason, honestly, I would be lying if I said that it didn't cross my mind, like maybe we just don't know something about Kirk, or maybe they're holding off on Kirk because they know Michael Penix might start, so let's not play him anymore in the preseason. That crossed my mind for a brief second. I'd actually be lying to you guys if I didn't think, is there any world where Michael Penix just starts outright over Kirk Cousins? That thought did cross my mind when I saw this news, but then I just, kind of snapped myself back into it, and there's no way Kirk wouldn't play, at least in his first year. Unless there's something we don't know, he's hurt or something like that, that can't be a possibility. So I scratched that, and I'm just left wondering why they decided to do this. This is presumably your future after Kirk, so you'd think a season or two with Kirk, seeing how he develops, or just seeing how he goes about his business, if he stays at an even level, a level that you still consider him your starter, or if he starts to decline at the end of this year, maybe after year 2 or something like that, you're still left, looking pretty decent at the quarterback position because you have Michael Penix. And with how impressed they were, clearly, like Raheem Morris says, and just after last week, you feel pretty good about this guy being your starter, kind of validating why you drafted him, right? But, again, the level that you jump into towards the NFL from college, no matter how old you may be, a 24-year-old rookie or a 21-year-old rookie, that adjustment that you have to make from college to the NFL is still a pretty significant one. So, to me, if I'm the Atlanta Falcons, if I'm Raheem Morris, great. He played very well in his first season, but how much can he, learn from it, get better from it, and go out there and do it again? That's a big thing that I feel like a lot of coaches and a lot of just players say, a lot just in the NFL is, let's stack them. Let's stack the wins, let's stack performances, and let's keep this a consistent thing, not just an anomaly that happens once or so every few games. That's something that I would have loved to see from Michael Penix, just because relating it back to the other rookie quarterbacks, I talked about Caleb, faced a different defense, they do different things. You make them available to different looks on the defensive side of the ball with different wrinkles that defensive coordinators have. You make them available to those opportunities to not only see it, adjust to it, learn from it, and see how they counter those moves. And if they're successful against it, that's awesome. But if not, they go back, they learn from it, and see, oh, well, this guy did this, where last week this other defensive coordinator did this other thing. That worked, this didn't work, so we'll learn from it, and next time I see it, I'll know what to do. Only limiting him to not only the game against the Dolphins, that's a different decision, but to then say, like Raheem Morris said, that they do a bunch of live stuff in practice, that is beneficial. I don't know how much, actual hitting and how much they go 100% in the Falcons practice, but I like the idea of that. But again, you can only learn so much stuff from going up against the same defense every single day. As much as they've gotten better, Matthew Judon coming in, Jesse Bates, one of the best safeties, Justin Simmons as well, they're going to give you struggles in practice. But to me, I think you're still limiting Michael Penix from seeing different coverages and seeing different looks from any team that he faces in just the preseason, because it's only 3 games. So I wouldn't have had any problem if they played him all 3 games, because again, he's not going to be the starter. Taking this approach is something you would do if Michael Penix was starting, kind of agreeing with my position before, crossing my mind that maybe Michael Penix is going to start. It's not going to happen, but this sort of strategy you've taken with Michael Penix is something you do with your starter. You throw him out there for about a quarter and a half, maybe an entire, 3 quarters or something like that, because he's not going to play in the other 2 preseason games. He's going to be your starter, so you don't really need to see him out there. But when you're talking about a rookie making that transition, and also the fact that he's just going to most likely sit on the bench according to this plan that you've laid out from the beginning, since you drafted Michael, since you brought in Kirk Cousins, you always said that this was going to be the future. Once Kirk wasn't ready or wasn't able to be at starter level, you were going to go to Michael Penix. So the fact that that was the plan and that you had this opportunity to play him all 3 games, but to just decide not to do it, is puzzling to me. I don't really agree with it. Again, because he's going to see different looks with each game that he plays, and also a lot of time on the bench, you do learn from just watching, talking with Kirk throughout the course of a game, maybe going over what he saw out there and something like that, but it's not the same as getting the live reps. Definitely not in an actual regular season game, because making that transition to the NFL level is one thing, but to go from preseason games to NFL regular season games is another transition that Michael Penix is going to have to go through eventually when he is named the starter. So this whole thing was very surprising to me, just weird, because it kind of relates back to what I was talking about last week with Sean McVay, and it almost seems like the younger McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur type of coaches are kind of taking the same approach to the preseason a little bit when we talked about Sean McVay and giving the opportunity to his assistant coach, Aubrey Pleasant, to coach in that game, almost not putting as much emphasis on the actual preseason game and resting a bunch of his starters as well, because, he just doesn't, I don't want to say he doesn't see the value in the preseason, but he just feels like it's better suited to get other players out there rather than having his starters out there for maybe just a quarter or a quarter and a half. It seems like more of these young guys, these young coaches that are like the McVays, like the Raheem Morrises, go out there and just don't play their starters as much in the preseason anymore, or are starting to make that transition into focusing more so on practice in a controlled environment, in a situation where you can really try and force what your quarterback or what your team is really trying to do out there, rather than going out there in a game, playing them for about a quarter, maybe 2 quarters or something like that, and not really getting out of it what you planned on, because you don't know what's going to happen in a game, obviously. At practice, you could simulate situations, simulate 2-minute drills and things like that. You really work on what you want your quarterback or your player to get better at, whereas in a game, you might play a couple series and you go 3-0 in all of them, and then really have you really improved on what you wanted to before the game started. So that's another reason why perhaps Raheem Morris went this way, but it's just weird. I don't really see the benefit in sitting Michael Penix too much. While he is more experienced than a couple other quarterbacks, perhaps, I think he's 24 or close to 25 already. I would have really liked to have seen him out there, especially against the Ravens, where if Michael Penix started that game, because Kirk Cousins already pretty much isn't going to play the entire preseason, going up against those Ravens starters, perhaps, it would have been interesting to see how he, combated that, what he would have done with very exotic looks that the Ravens throw out there as well, against good players as well. Would have been just great to see for Michael Penix. Even if he struggled, it would have been something to learn on and something you could afford to happen, because he's not going to be the starter, so it's not like there's any real pressure on him to go out there and perform if Kirk is just going to start throughout 2024. So that's sort of how I felt about it. Just wasn't expecting this news, honestly. We saw Drake May play for the first time. He looked great. Caleb, Jayden, Bo. J.J. McCarthy's already been ruled out for the entire year. This would have been cool to see Michael Penix out there, but, it was the decision that the Falcons felt was best for them. We're going to see how it pays out eventually. Hopefully nothing happens to Kirk this year or anything where it forces Michael Penix to play, but, it is what it is now. We'll see. Maybe they'll have a change of heart. Probably not, but that's just me being hopeful. But But that's pretty much it for that segment on Raheem Morris and the Falcons deciding to sit Michael Penix for the second preseason game. We're going to move on to the other topic I mentioned before. Gardner Minshew officially winning the Raiders head coaching job for 2024, beating out Aiden O'Connell. We're going to get into what Antonio Pierce said and just my thoughts on Gardner Minshew winning this job. Then Geno Smith also approaching the Seattle Seahawks about looking for a new contract. And lastly, in the last segment, we're going to talk about the Steelers and Russell Wilson making his preseason debut, Justin Fields coming on, and the offense looking pretty disappointing from the first week of preseason. So those topics are coming up. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Thank you for joining me here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and continuing on our quarterback theme, we're going to get to the Raiders announcement officially naming Gardner Minshew their starting quarterback for 2024. Head coach Antonio Pierce stayed true to his word and named Gardner Minshew the starter yesterday on Sunday afternoon when he mentioned that after last week where he said that they were most likely going to name the starter after their second preseason game, which I thought was a little bit early. But, you know, he wasn't bluffing. He named Gardner Minshew the starter. And on that, you know, overall, his statement on naming Minshew the starter, Antonio Pierce said, "Myself, General Manager Tom Telesco, and Luke Getsy discussed it this morning being Sunday, yesterday. A lot of things went into it. It wasn't based off of last night. There's a lot of factors. We feel Gardner gives us the best opportunity to get off to a fast start." And just after the game this past weekend against the Dallas Cowboys, they both played in that game. Aiden O'Connell went 14 for 20 for 96 yards and 1 touchdown. He also threw 1 interception, while Gardner Minshew went 10 for 21 with 95 yards against the Dallas Cowboys. And, you know, there was different scenarios going into this quarterback battle and how the Raiders were going to make this determination on deciding whether to go with Aiden O'Connell, you know, the Raiders' experienced quarterback, just because he was there last year for a good amount of games after they benched Jimmy Garoppolo. So he had that connection, that chemistry a little bit, and you had that familiarity there also with, you know, him being in there every single day, him being your quarterback, and kind of knowing what you were going to get out of Aiden O'Connell. Whereas with Minshew, he brought some more positives, you know, just more years in the NFL as a starter, being promoted from backup to starter or just starting outright as well. So you had that, but he didn't have the familiarity that he did with other organizations. Antonio Pierce didn't really have any knowledge of Gardner before, you know, getting to know him this offseason. So there were some good, there were some bad with each one, but Antonio Pierce added that Gardner Minshew's processing, his operation, and just his personality, his energy, and his leadership, Antonio Pierce described as infectious, were all reasons why they went with Gardner Minshew over Aiden O'Connell. You know, basically bringing up also the ball security, the decisiveness, and also the Minshew magic that Gardner brings as well here and there when he has to. And he urged both of them pretty much to stay ready. You know, in his statement that he gave yesterday, he named Gardner the starter, but mentioned that Aiden, he feels is still a starting level quarterback at anywhere at some point in his career, whether that is with the Raiders or he goes on and finds another job, another situation where he could become the starter. It's Gardner's job right now, but it feels like Antonio Pierce has still left that door a little bit open, which we'll see how that plays out, with the Raiders team and where they are right now in terms of development and becoming a contending level team. You could see a world where, something goes wrong, maybe Minshew's not playing as well. They find themselves in a little bit of a rut at some point this year, and maybe making a quarterback change is what's needed. So I wouldn't be too surprised if they explore the opportunity of going back to Aiden, but I think they made the right choice here. I think that going with Gardner right now is the safer pick right now for the Raiders, and I just think that's something that they needed to do, not taking too big of a risk right now just in Antonio Pierce's second season technically, but also his first year as the official head coach, because just in these situations, I always feel like going with the veteran is always just going to end up being the case. With Russell and Justin, I feel like Russell's just going to be named the starter. With Sam Darnold and JJ, it was probably going to be Sam, and now it's definitely going to be Sam with JJ McCarthy's injury. And also with Jacoby Brissett and Drake May. Also, I feel like the Patriots, as much as the young, athletic, quarterbacks go with Drake May in that situation, I feel like that's all well and, it's exciting. But going with the safer choice always feels like the decision to go with in these situations. And this one might have been a little bit different just because you have those factors of Aiden kind of coming in last year in a backup role, becoming the starter, and then Gardner being signed this year. It's not so much that you had a veteran in there that has had success in the past, like Russell, or some of these guys across the NFL that do become those bridge quarterbacks like Alex Smith or somebody like that. These guys that are reputable and have the experience and success in the NFL, you feel great starting those guys. But this one was a little bit more even, but at the end of the day, the Raiders decided to go with Gardner. And to me, going back to an idea that I had, I think back a couple weeks when I talked about this situation, it felt like it was important to not only name the starter, but to know who that backup was going to be and why that situation was so beneficial to them, at least to start the year, if that makes sense, right? A lot of times worst case scenario, when you name the wrong starter, not wrong in a sense that they're not good players, that they shouldn't deserve to be starting, but wrong in a sense that maybe they don't face negatives or downsides or just issues, obstacles when they do become the starter and it doesn't go well. Maybe they don't deal with that as well as the other guy does, and maybe they just can't get over throwing an interception or taking a bad sack or something like that. They get in their own head, and then from there, the head coach has to make a decision whether or not to make a change that early and potentially ruin the starter's confidence, or, you just keep him in there, hope that he gets over it, but, that's still a big risk to take. I think with this situation, also you alleviate some of the pressure from whoever is the backup, and I think in this situation, it's very beneficial as well, because with Aiden being named the starting quarterback, right now at this stage, he only really started getting this opportunity last year, where at the beginning of last year, I don't think anybody would have thought that Aiden O'Connell was going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. So now, to make him the starter right away after that scenario, after that situation, I think it would have put a lot of pressure on him, maybe something that Antonio Pierce and the Raiders staff and just organization didn't think that he was quite ready for yet. Whereas with Gardner, he's been in this situation before. He's been in there. He's gotten benched. He's been at different places all over his career. So he is better equipped to deal with this pressure right away. And, if Aiden does become the starter, he does come in from a backup role. It's something that he's not too unfamiliar with and not something that he just has to make a drastic change just from year one to year two. So I think that also played a part in this and why Minshew was the better start in the Raiders' opinion, clearly, and also mine. And now going forward with Gardner, you have that NFL experience. He is a veteran now, but I think that connection with Devontae Adams is going to be huge. You had that with Aiden O'Connell to some extent, but now with Gardner, I think both of those guys got to get together, certainly have to get together and go over, what Davante Adams likes, what Gardner likes, how the ball comes out of Gardner's hands on some throws, where they could see that their relationship could really blossom in certain situations or something like that. The timing of it all, just on the field as well. Certain looks where you don't have to call out something. You could just give them a look and they know what you're thinking. It's a lot to ask for. Obviously, I know that in the first year, but as close as you can get to that level of connection with especially Davante Adams, I think it's going to be huge for this team, because last year we obviously, for those that saw the receiver series on Netflix, that at certain points in the season with Jimmy Garoppolo as the quarterback and with, I'm forgetting the Raiders coach at the beginning of the year last year, the old Patriots offensive coordinator, his name's escaping my mind, but at that point in time, the offense wasn't rolling with the Raiders. Jimmy was not giving Davante too much to work with, and it came to a point where you saw the frustration really boil over for Davante Adams in that scene in the locker room where he contemplated, at least for a second, about leaving the Raiders and just, having enough of that situation overall. That was before, Antonio Pierce came in, kind of changed the dynamic, changed the environment in that locker room, and it got a little bit better. So you don't want to revisit that, obviously, this year, and that's going to be huge for Gardner and Davante to get on the same page. And I'm also interested to see, not that it matters too much, honestly, well, it kind of does, what Davante Adams thinks of the decision. I know he's not going to come out and say if he disagrees with it. If he truly thought Aiden should have been the starter, he's not going to come out and say that it was a bad choice, obviously, but that's something that I would be interested to know at some point this year or next year or something like that, whether or not Davante thinks that this was a good decision, or if this was the guy that he would have gone through, or would have gone with, as the starter in 2024. But we're probably going to have to wait for that. And lastly, just to mention here and close out the segment, I think also, as much as the connection with Davante is important, I'm also looking at offensive coordinator Luke Getsy and how he adapts everything to Gardner's skill set. What does Gardner do well that Luke Getsy can incorporate into their offense and mold it around now Gardner Minshew, knowing what makes him tick, where his strong suits are at, where his weak points are at. How does Luke Getsy also get the best out of Gardner Minshew, and that way making it easier for guys like Davante, like Brock Bowers, like Jacoby Myers, all these guys, they have good weapons there. I like the receiving core. It's just a matter of putting it all together. Now that Gardner is your starter, you can head on in these next couple weeks before the regular season and plan the offense out, get everybody to know, get everyone accustomed to Gardner being the starter now, and getting that reputation, that chemistry up to a level that you feel very good about before you get into that week one matchup in the regular season. So that's what I'm thinking of, not only of this decision, but also going forward. It's Gardner's job to lose. There is some pressure. It feels like this isn't the last chapter in this quarterback competition, but for right now, Gardner is the guy for the Raiders, and hopefully it pans out, because I like Antonio Pierce. I think he's a good coach, and the fact that he took over last year and made it a enjoyable situation to be in, I think that says a lot about him. So hopefully he gets this decision right and the Raiders find some success and get a little bit better in 2024. But now we're going to head to another break here in the show, and we're going to talk about Geno Smith and maybe getting a new contract from the Seattle Seahawks. How likely is that to happen? And talking about the Steelers' second preseason game, Russell Wilson in his debut, how did Justin Fields do after relieving Russell Wilson? Those two topics are coming up right after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping straight into some more quarterback talk on today's show, we're going to look at the Seattle Seahawks starting quarterback, Geno Smith. And what his situation is looking like with Seattle, not only heading into 2024, but also in years afterwards, because Geno is now 1 year into that 3-year contract extension that he got from the Seahawks after a very impressive 2022. You go back and you look at the stats and the fact that he made it into the playoffs with the Seahawks with a squad or just a team overall that many didn't pencil in as being playoff caliber. The fact that Geno played up to that level and got them into the dance is pretty noteworthy. So, yes, he deserved the extension. I think he did. I think that's right to say. That's factual to say that Geno deserved that extension. But afterwards, following it up by 9 and 8 seasons, missing out on the playoffs, and now you're left in a spot where Pete Carroll is now gone. You're sort of starting a new era with Mike Macdonald coming over from the Baltimore Ravens, and you don't really know where this quarterback situation really stands because both Geno Smith and Seattle are now heading into this weird area where they already restructured Geno's contract during this offseason, and it still lacks some security and some guarantees in those first 2 years. According to Mike Garafolo, Geno Smith, because of the lack of that security and guarantees, he approached the Seattle Seahawks about a new contract at some point in the near future. Geno is signed through 2025 with this 3-year deal that he's on, but Seattle could still move on from him after this year with only a cap charge of $13.5 million. So it's not too expensive where they feel the need to not be able to move on from Geno Smith. So it feels like to me, the way that this is going, the way that the contract was set up, that maybe it's almost, dare I say, irrelevant how Geno Smith plays this year in sort of a prove-it year, because I just feel like it's not really giving the signs that the Seahawks are too eager to extend him right now, especially after restructuring his deal and the lack of security and guarantees throughout the first 2 years. Because on that, it already isn't, painting a pretty optimistic picture that Geno could be there, but also NFL Network's Mike Garafolo also talked about it and where he sees this situation going. He mentioned it in just this statement here. He said, "They've talked about it. They've tried to talk about it. I know that. That's something that's been broached this offseason. So that could be something that gets done before week 1 and is addressed by the team." But he also mentioned afterwards that it doesn't appear imminent that the Seattle Seahawks, from their point of view, feel that this is something that needs to happen. So that being the case, Geno obviously wanting that restructuring or looking for a new deal, there comes some doubt with that, obviously. Not only are you following it after 2 9 and 8 seasons, which, isn't a losing season, but also I think when you have 500 seasons, the last thing you want to do is have the exact same record from last year where you were 500. And if that doesn't scream no improvement or just staying the same, I don't know what does. After being 9 and 8 two seasons in a row, you get rid of Pete Carroll, which something needed to happen. I guess I didn't think it would be that, but regardless, they made a move to try and create some change. And you bring in Mike Macdonald, which I think is a good hire. I really like him and what he did with the Ravens defense last year, how dominant they were. I think he could bring that approach here to Seattle with some good players on the defensive side of the ball. Hopefully he can make that unit perhaps the identity of this team and not put so much pressure on Geno and the offense if that defense is keeping the teams to under 19 or 18 points per game. I think that's pretty manageable. But sticking to Geno Smith here and just his situation and why I almost feel it is irrelevant that this situation about maybe approaching the Seahawks about a contract extension is almost just like a last-ditch effort for Geno Smith, because I'm not feeling too great about Geno sticking with the Seahawks past this year for a couple of reasons. One of them being that Geno is already 33. So in any way, if you're looking for a contract extension or just a new contract in general, you want more guarantees, right? But to me, that doesn't make too much sense for the Seahawks, because if you're going to give Geno Smith guaranteed money, you'd want him to be your quarterback, or you want to feel good about him being your quarterback for the next couple of years, not just one more year, and still being able to move on from him after 2024. So if you're talking about a contract extension, at any point in these negotiations, to me, I would want additional years to have any quarterback as my quarterback going forward. But with Geno already 33, I don't think he's the long-term answer for the Seahawks. And I think this year might just be the last year we see him at starting level capacity before he starts to dip a little bit. So if you're not going to add years onto that because of Geno's age and the doubts about his playing ability, I'm not going to give him more guaranteed money if I'm still just going to move on from him after 2024, or if that's the plan at the beginning of this entire thing. I'm not going to give him more guarantees and more additional years if I don't really feel confident in him being my starter for the foreseeable future. And also with a new head coach, I always say it, with Jonathan Gannon in Arizona at the time, or usually when you're bringing in a new quarterback, just in any situation, I feel like those quarterbacks typically like to bring in their guys. They don't usually like to inherit quarterbacks, especially if they're not generational, special ability kind of players, those one-of-one kind of guys in certain scenarios. Like with Trevor and Urban Meyer in that situation, obviously you knew Trevor was the guy, the generational talent, and you're going to inherit a guy like that, and you sort of know that it was the bad coaching and all that extra stuff he did off the field as to why you feel okay if you're a new head coach coming in there trying to get all those bad habits out of Trevor and trying to develop him in the next couple of years. You know, that's what Doug Peterson did, and now Trevor is being paid like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and he certainly has improved since then. But inheriting a guy that's, you know, in his 30s already, usually to me that screams like you're going to need a new quarterback sooner rather than later. With Cam Newton and the Patriots is another example when they drafted Mac Jones as well. So it always feels like this is just a requirement for a new head coach to really bring in his ideas to what he wants this team to look like. And if that quarterback doesn't fit that idea or their scheme, they're going to move on from him. So that's one thing. That's one reason where I don't think Geno is going to stick around too well. And also the idea of bringing in Sam Howell as well. At the time when people saw it, if people saw it, it didn't really, bat an eye too much. Sam Howell signs with the Seahawks. Great. He's going to be the backup probably, like whatever. But the idea of bringing Sam Howell in, a guy that has starting level experience, maybe not good, maybe awful if you think that, but he did start in the NFL. He has that experience, so it wouldn't be too much of a shock for him. The fact that they brought him in gives me more leeway that they could move on from Geno Smith, because you move on from him, and now you can have Sam Howell in there on the last year of his rookie deal, knowing that he is going to be that bridge quarterback, that he gives you sort of a period where you can start him if you don't find anybody else to, increase the level at the quarterback position. You feel all right with having Sam Howell in there as your guy. In that period of having Sam Howell in there, you improve on the rest of the team. You make sure you get better on the offensive line. You bring in more skill-based position players if you feel that's a need. You improve the defense even more. And then once that last year of the rookie contract is up for Sam Howell, then you can start to look into the quarterback position, maybe drafting a guy, maybe signing somebody in free agency. Dak is the quarterback that, pops in my mind right away, but I think that's a little bit out of the pay grade for the Seattle Seahawks. I don't know if they can afford Dak at this point in time, so maybe not someone like him, but I don't know. Maybe drafting somebody is always a good opportunity if you're that high up in the draft, or a guy like Mac Jones, someone that I don't really feel like he's a backup quarterback. I feel like with how high he was drafted in the seasons that he had at Alabama, I feel like he's just needing of another opportunity. So the Seahawks maybe could be that chance for him. Also, Trey Lance, if you really want to explore those other lanes, if it doesn't work out with the Dallas Cowboys, maybe you bring him in and you could potentially get something out of him. You don't really know what the quarterback market is going to be each and every year, but those are just some names that pop into my mind if the Seahawks are looking for alternatives after Geno Smith, maybe after Sam Howell. But in that time period where you move on from Geno Smith, say after 2024, you have Sam for about a year, and then in that time, you get better, improving the rest of the cast around your next future quarterback. And then once you do get that guy in there, ideally the one that you want it to be, the rest of the team isn't lacking in any major department where it's not so wise to go draft a quarterback. You improve the rest of the team, make sure you're over-prepared for a rookie quarterback, and that way it makes the transition a lot smoother, almost like Caleb Williams this year, obviously, and the Bears. You can even throw C.J. Stroud in there last year with the Houston Texans. Those are ideally what you wanted to happen, but it's obviously a lot harder done than just said. So we're going to keep an eye on that. I just don't see an extension happening for Geno after they restructured this year to alleviate some of their cap space. It doesn't scream that they're just going to use a good amount of it if they're just going to extend Geno afterwards. So that's why I started this whole thing with saying that it's almost irrelevant, just because I think the writing is pretty much on the wall for Geno Smith, unfortunately. But it's not like he's just going to retire and that's going to be the end of it. Maybe it's a prove-it year in a way that it's a prove-it year to some other team. If another team is needing his services, he could go somewhere else if he performs very well this year with the Seattle Seahawks. But I just think the Seahawks and Geno are up on their marriage here, and I think a divorce is in store after 2024. That's just how I'm feeling. Let me know what you guys think about that and Geno's chances of continuing to be the starter in maybe 2025 for the Seahawks. But with that being the case now, we're going to go to our last break of the show, and when we return, we're going to talk about some more quarterbacks in Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson making his debut. Justin Fields also exciting a lot of the fan base with how he played. And what does this mean for the Steelers offense after overall a bad performance? We're going to get into that in just a few seconds. We are back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about some more quarterbacks to round out the show. This time in the Pittsburgh area, talking about the Steelers' quarterback battle between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. This Week 2 preseason matchup against the Buffalo Bills was much anticipated just because we saw Russell Wilson in his first action as a Steelers quarterback. And Russ and Justin Fields both played in this game, obviously. Both of them got about 5 to 4 drives, I want to say. And Pittsburgh's lost to the Buffalo Bills 9-3. So, as exciting as preseason games can be, a 9-3 finish, you can only imagine how many people were actually watching that game. Unfortunately, I was one of them, and I did see the disappointing performance from the starters and also just carrying it on throughout the rest of the game. Justin Fields was the quarterback that led the only scoring drive in this game for the Pittsburgh Steelers just before the end of the first half. And overall, Russell Wilson finished 8 of 10 for 47 yards, whereas Justin Fields finished 11 for 17 for 92 yards and also 42 rushing yards as well. But although the headlines and everything's going to be Russell Wilson's debut, how disappointing it was and everything like that, the biggest issue to me was the offensive line and just the pass protection we saw and how awful it was. Honestly, there's no real other way to put it, especially with Russell being with the starters to start the game. He started the game ahead of Justin Fields, and More so, it was the right tackle. To me, Broderick Jones, their former first-round pick from last year, he struggled a lot, massively, and it was very evident against Gregory Rousseau. I always say with offensive linemen and like centers, well, obviously centers and things like that. When you're doing your job, nobody talks about you. When you're doing a good job, nobody mentions you. You're not really a star of the game or anything like that. That's the kind of love that offensive linemen get. But when you're doing an awful job, everybody talks about you. It's super obvious, and that's the last thing you want. And that's sort of what happened with Broderick Jones, because he was deployed again at that right tackle position. And to be, I guess, fair to the Steelers and Broderick Jones, Broderick played right tackle for his rookie season, right? He played there because the Steelers weren't very good. They didn't really have a good right tackle. So Broderick Jones, being a left tackle in college at Georgia, he made the switch over last year to play right tackle. And while that might be more of a versatility thing, you might feel like that's a great thing to have in Broderick Jones. It's weird for offensive linemen, and especially tackles, to make that transition, because in one spot, you're obviously using a bunch of different movements, a bunch of different feet movements, a bunch of different get-offs, and just hand placements when you're on the left-hand side as the left tackle. And then you make the change over to right tackle, and you're, kicking back with the other foot. Your stance is a little bit weird. The orientation of where to put your hands is just different when you're on the complete different side of things. I can only imagine maybe it's probably like writing with your other hand almost. That's kind of like what I'm thinking about it. And even though Broderick got the experience last year of playing there, my biggest issue with this, and it's almost just like the circumstance that the Steelers have to deal with, is that they can't really control that Troy Fautanu got hurt. It's an unfortunate thing, and we talked about how he was penciled in more likely than not to be the starter right away as a rookie, but he gets hurt, and now you put Broderick Jones out there over there because Dan Moore, the other left tackle, isn't capable of playing over there. So it didn't put Broderick Jones in a good position, because obviously you feel good that he did play there last year, but it's not his natural position. So that really got exposed in Saturday's game against the Buffalo Bills, where he just got absolutely bullied against Gregory Rousseau. He just tossing him to the side and getting to Russell Wilson. Not a great look. And it's bad when you know that Steelers fans and some analysts are calling for the rookie to come back as soon as possible to start there instead of a guy that's in his second year. But I don't want to dump on Broderick Jones too much, because I truly believe that it's just not his position. Yes, he played there in his first year, but he's a left tackle, and playing him on the other side is just not going to go well. He also has been dealing with an elbow injury of some sorts. He wears a brace on it, and he was able to play, but I think that also limits the power that you have in that right arm, I think it is. So not a great showing for him, and it kind of negated what you saw out of Russell Wilson, or what you could have saw out of him if he's always just getting sacked, always has pressure in his face. And Mike Tomlin talked about it as well. He said, "We've got to do a better job in pass protection than we did, not only in possession downs, but just in general." And I was really upfront with the group about it in that regard. That can't be a problem for us. We've got to be better than we were tonight in that area. And he also mentioned that any evaluation of either quarterback was sort of essentially negated because of how bad the pass protection was. And you have that bad taste in your mouth now after the second preseason game. You have a decent one in the first one, but also the offense was still hit or miss, and now you follow that up with a disappointing performance. Now this third game, I think, becomes even more important, not only obviously for the quarterback position, but apparently for the offensive line as well, to make up for that bad performance in week 2. Their last preseason game will be against the Detroit Lions on Saturday once again, so a lot is going to be put into that. I think that'll be a true determining factor in this quarterback position, because although it might be true that Justin Fields appeared more exciting, more, just equipped to be the starting quarterback, because he did make some great throws. They were able to use his running ability a lot, and stat-wise, it looks a little bit more impressive than Russell Wilson. And I think the biggest thing that I've just heard a lot of people say, just today, with it being, national news apparently, that Russell Wilson was just awful in his first game, I think that the athletic ability is what stands out with Justin Fields, and almost like his running ability, that athleticism, gives him the opportunity to make the lack of Steelers pass protection not such a major factor if he's able to buy himself some time, escape, and turn a bad situation into a good one because he's able to run. Whereas Russell Wilson, he's sort of past those years, obviously, so he's more of a stationary target and isn't able to do that as much, or at least to the level of Justin Fields, obviously. So that seems to be the biggest thing, with everybody already calling for Justin Fields to be the starter today and how awful Russell Wilson played. I'm still holding out. I don't think Russ played that bad. For as far as preseason games go, I don't put too much stock in it, obviously, because it is the preseason. Because last year, when I'm looking at the Steelers team, and this is sort of my conspiracy theory of it all, when I'm looking at the Steelers last year in their preseason games, they were lights out. Kenny Pickett was looking great. The offense under Matt Canada was looking, just awesome. They put up a great score against last year when they played the Buffalo Bills in last year's preseason game. I think the Falcons as well, they played great in that one. And then when they headed into the regular season, they were awful. It looked like the preseason didn't matter whatsoever, and it sort of doesn't. So now this year, maybe a bad preseason leads to a very good regular season. That's my hope, at least. And in all seriousness, the preseason, it only goes so far in evaluating, to me, how these guys are actually going to be in the regular season, because, again, Justin Fields played very well, but once the starters got kind of out of there, you can point to that being a reason why maybe he played so well. But I still think that Justin and that running ability kind of helps to hide a bad pass protection, like a lot of people have said just today. But, for right now, I'm thinking about this third preseason game and how important it is now for not only Russell Wilson to kind of make up for the lack of production that we saw, but also for this offensive line. I just think you have to put Broderick Jones now on the left. I don't think you really have a choice. You can't put him out there anymore. Also, with a bad performance by Broderick Jones, it kind of brings up this question in my mind. Do you start Troy Fautanu being a rookie and coming off an injury regardless because of how bad Broderick Jones plays, or do you run the risk of putting Jones out there again after a bad performance like this one against a guy like Matthew Judon? So that'll be an interesting dynamic to see what the Steelers decide to go up or decide to end up with, and also who starts this third game overall, because Justin Fields is getting, I think, a lot of love on this Monday after the Steelers' second preseason game, where is Mike Tomlin going to go ahead and start Justin Fields because of that excitement, or is he still going to go with Russell Wilson because he keeps saying he's in the pole position? And one thing about that decision is that if he keeps Russ as the starter, I don't think it says too much. I think that's what people expect to happen. But if he does start Justin Fields, I think that pretty much gives up the decision of who's going to be the starter, because it's going to be a big change if you decide to start Russell Wilson in the second game and afterwards you say you couldn't really get a gauge on what their performances were really like because the pass protection was so bad, but you still bench Russell Wilson for that third game and decide to not start him. It's kind of contradicting there, so I would feel like if Mike Tomlin made that decision to start Justin Fields in the third week, I think that's pretty much telling us who the starter's going to be. But my just thoughts on the starter as I just close out this episode and this segment is that I still feel like I've mentioned with Drake May, with other rookie quarterbacks, with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, I feel like, to me, you always got to go with the veteran. I would feel more safe and more just at ease going with the veteran, because I don't think Justin Fields needs all that pressure right away on him right off the start. I think you give Russell that opportunity to do it because of who he is and his resume and everything like that, right? That's all great. But I feel like in the long run, giving it to Russell being the starter for the Steelers and not putting that much pressure on Justin Fields so early, I think will do better things for the Steelers team and these two quarterbacks, because Justin going from the second quarterback to the starter, I think would benefit him a lot more than being the starter right away. It's great you won the job and everything, but if you do play bad, I think you destroy his confidence if he does play bad, and then you just decide to bench him for Russell Wilson, because right now I think everyone's thinking that Justin Fields gives you more than Russell Wilson. So if you decide to bench Justin in the regular season and start Russell, you almost can't go back to Justin if Russell does prove to be this other quarterback that just isn't what he is anymore, and then you really have a problem with the Steelers quarterbacks, because you can't go back to Justin and Russell is not that much better than him. So to me, just long-term sake, and what I hope happens is that Russ starts his third preseason game. He does enough to convince more people. He shows why he's in there, the ball placement, the deep throws down the field, the ball security. He wins the job for the regular season, plays well enough, and then hopefully at some point, because I do want to see Justin Fields, I do think he has something to offer. Justin gets his opportunity at some point in the regular season, for whatever reason it might be. So that's how I feel about it. I think Russ will end up being the starter. I don't think Mike Tomlin also wouldn't waive or give in to all this national opinion, this national just attention on everyone saying Justin should be the starter. He's going to go with the one that he feels gives this team the best opportunity, and I feel like that's going to be Russell. I just feel like it's all been set up like this, so we'll see. The offensive line is certainly something else to keep an eye on, because that was really bad on Saturday, so that has to be fixed, and this quarterback position has to be addressed also as well. But that pretty much does it for today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on a very heavy quarterback episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to catch more of this show, check out both YouTube channels to see a lot of different ways that you can catch NFL content in regards to this show. And lastly, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL coverage and discussions on all the latest headlines around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me, and I hope to see you guys back here with me again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that